Awesome. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I'm Ashley Myhre, and I am actually one of the new compliance brokers here. Um, I've been in real estate for about 20 years, so I've kind of seen the ups and downs. So if you have any questions related to specific situations as we go through this, I can kind of, give my 2 cents on that. So there are two versions of the Addendum A. So this is the Greater Milwaukee Association of Realtors Addendum A. And this is the one probably most commonly used because it has more provisions that you can add. There's a lot of safeguards here for a buyer. So it's a nice form to include in every offer. It's not required to include in an offer, but it definitely would be a good option to add it just because there's so much protective language. There's another addendum A that is WRA specific, and that is only a 2-page document, and it's got some of the same features. It just has less of the verbiage that kind of protects the buyer. Um, so line one of the addendum A is just going to be the date and the buyer, and then the address of the property. Inclusion of optional provisions on line 5 is if there's anything that's an open box um, that has filled out information, it can get kind of gray and assume that it should be added to the addendum A. So for this form and really for the offer to purchase, if you're not utilizing one of the boxes, best practice is to put NA in that area instead of leaving it blank. Line 7 is for the seller contribution. So if your buyer would like closing cost credits, this is the best area to add that in because it's got specific verbiage on how it would be used and what type of loan cost credit they can utilize. So it says they will give a loan cost credit for prepayables at closing in the amount of, that's where you'd put the amount to assist the buyer in purchasing the property. The really important thing to note here is that any funds not applied to the closing cost credit go back to the seller at closing. So it's really important to double check with the lender of your buyer, ask how much of the closing cost contribution they could use for their purposes. Because if you're negotiating $10,000 and the lender can only utilize $7,000 from the seller as closing cost credit, then that $3,000 automatically goes back to the seller. So maybe a better option if you want to negotiate like a $10,000 option would be doing the 7,000 in a closing cost credit and then maybe 3,000 off the purchase price or something along those lines. So just make sure that what you're negotiating here is able to be used, and you would do that with checking with the lender. Line 10 is a home warranty program. If your buyer wants to add a home warranty program, or if the seller is already saying, hey, we're offering a home warranty, you would want to make sure that this box is checked and you will put in the number of the cost of it. So usually what I do is if for instance, I like a specific home warranty company, I know that their base home warranty is 625. So I'll put in it shall not exceed 625 into that line. And then you choose who's going to pay for the home warranty and who's going to order the home warranty on this page or on this line. So typically, like if you want control over the type of home warranty that they're going to be providing, you would want to say that the home warranty is paid by the seller and ordered by the selling agent so that you can choose which home warranty company it is, and then you would order the home warranty to be put on the closing statement. If it's already included, you would need to just use whichever home warranty company they have here and put seller and listing as the options. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. Line 15 through 24 is, or 15, sorry, is just an association fee. So if there's an HOA for a subdivision or if it's a condominium, you can put the association fee here. There is on the condo offer to purchase a place to put this as well. But if you are doing a condo, I would put that in this area as well, just to kind of dot I's, cross T's. But this is most often used for subdivisions that have homeowner association fees. Lines 16 through 24 are really kind of a lot, kind of cover yourself information. So it talks about that real estate agents might furnish a list of inspectors, people who do testing for perhaps mold or something along those lines, but it's kind of taking the onus off of the agent for providing a list of people, and that the buyer's still ultimately the person who needs to decide who they're using for the inspection and trusting that person. Keller Williams and or you as an agent can't be held for, intentional wrongdoing or like negligence based on who they've chosen as the inspector, even if we had given them a list of names. So this is just kind of saying, yeah, we might give you this information, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that gives us any kind of onus on if you aren't happy with the services or whatever the case might be. So this is one of those things that I really like in the Addendum A and why I like to include it, even if I'm not checking any of the boxes on it. I still include it in the offer to purchase as an attachment. Line 25 is the testing contingency. So this is going to be if you want the option for your buyer to do any specific testing as it relates to the inspection. So the automatics that people typically want to write in here is like asbestos or mold. This just is you asking permission up front that you could do testing of something found in the inspection report. So if the buyer or if the inspector says, hey, there's organic growth and it should be tested to verify and, looked at by a qualified professional, that's where you already have the permission here to test for mold or asbestos, whatever you have to write in this area. So if you have a buyer who's super nervous about mold specifically or asbestos and they want the opportunity to test, make sure you're writing those specific tests in here. A lot of people will write any test deemed necessary by the home inspector at the time of inspection. So it's kind of a catch-all for if the home inspector says asbestos needs to be looked for or whatever the case is. More often than not, honestly, when people select this, they don't opt for the testing, especially for mold and stuff, just because you can still get it remedied without proving that it's mold. You can still get it cleaned up and handled appropriately. But this would allow you to do the actual test by a company. Number 31 is 31 through 39 is as it relates to well water. So this is going to be the testing of the water within the well, and it's going to have to be they usually have it 15 days prior to closing, so they want it done as close to closing as possible. However, if they had one done already and it's not earlier than 60 days prior to the date of the closing, that can still be utilized for this purpose. It has to be done by a professional company and a state certified company, and it has to verify that the water is within the levels that are set forth by the state and federal laws that are safe for human consumption. So the things that they look for are automatically are coliform, E. coli, nitrates, and arsenic. If you are in an area that has other high things, so for instance, one of the big things that I've had a lot of people start adding in is radium. So you can add that in as an additional thing that they would be searching for in the water. So radium is like a byproduct of radon, basically. So that's something I've seen a lot more people writing in, and I might consider writing in on lines 34 and 35 as an additional thing to test for in the water. They do have to provide copies of this report, and if anything comes back as high, they need to remedy that. Numbers, does anyone have a question on that? Okay. Um, number 40, lines 40 through 46 essentially are going to be about the well system itself and how it operates. So this again is done 15 days prior to closing. Again, if they had this done, it would need to be no older than 60 days from the date of the closing. So again, has to be a licensed pump installer, well driller, that type of thing. Most of the time, this is the same company. They are looking for, and the important thing to note here is line 43. It says they're looking for that it has the appropriate well pressure and that the system conforms to the code in effect at the time they were installed and are not disapproved for current use. So the key here is that it's in effect at the time they were installed. So if it's a super old well, it might be prudent to consider removing in effect at the time they were installed and simply having it read to conform to the code and are not disapproved for current use. I've had like a super old well that had a really low pressure, stuff like that, that still passed because it was up to code at the time it was used, installed, pardon me. But it was also not disproved for current use. So it's kind of like this gray area that allows for something like that to pass through this. Both of these, if they come back high, the seller does have the right to cure, and more often than not, the seller is going to cure it because they're going to have to do it with any other offer. So they're going to get it handled prior to closing. Another, oh, the nice part here too is if you select the well system and you forget to check the well water, line 46 reads, if the well is inspected, the well water testing is automatically selected. So if for some reason you forgot to check the water testing contingency, but you did check the system, that would automatically include well water. So it's again kind of a catch for you to make sure everything's buttoned up where it needs to be. 47 through 50 is regarding abandoned wells. I actually just got this question yesterday. They had a well on the property, but they are municipal water and sewer. And the well, nobody really knew what the function was. They were assuming it was used for mainly outdoor watering, things like that. But the seller that formerly owned it was not able to be the one selling it. So there was a POA. So everyone was like, well, what's going on with this well? And what, do we need to get it tested? And it was there, but it was not functional. Nobody used it for anything. And it basically needed to be abandoned. So if the seller is aware that it's there and that it can't be used or isn't attached to anything, then it would be up to the seller to make sure that it is properly abandoned and provide the documentation. So that would be abandoned with the DNR as well as letting the title company know that it's no longer part of the property. Lines 51 through 54 are shared wells. This is basically some subdivisions have shared wells. It's not super common, but there are subdivisions that have a shared well. And this is where that agreement would fall in. They would still need to provide a copy of the agreement, make sure that it's recorded with the county and that the title company has a access to that it's definitely been recorded, so there's no who's in charge of what after the fact. Lines 55 through 64 are the sewer system. So if there's a mound system or things along that line, this is where you're gonna check that you want to have that looked at. So they would have a professional company come in. Again, it's 15 days prior to closing, and you can put in the time frame. So it's again 60, it has to be 60 days to the closing date if they've already had it done. They check that basically the same thing, that it conforms to the code and the effect that the system was installed and not disproved for current use. So sometimes here where we'll run into issues is someone has like a traditional septic system, and let's say they've added a bedroom and it was a 3-bedroom house, now a 4-bedroom house. They're going to sell the house. That septic system is no longer acceptable for a 3-bedroom house, and it needs to be changed to a mound system. That's where something like this would come in. They would be testing not only that it conforms to the code and the effect that it was used, but that that it's also not disproved for current use, which a septic that was prior regulated for 3 bedrooms is now not going to be functional for a 4-bedroom home. Therefore, a mound system would need to be installed, and that would be on the seller. So this is a highly regulated thing, which they kind of talk about again in lines 63 through 64. So they're aware that it's regulated by state and county, and any ongoing inspections or testing may be required based on the transfer. So the county might require that the new owner provide some sort of documentation that they've had this pumped or something along those lines. So it's just a cautionary, hey, you might need to do something after you close on this based on the county or state. So each contingency for the well, water, and any kind of septic system, they do have to provide you with a copy of it. It has to be give an actual receipt. It has to be provided to the buyer within that specific time frame. And if they opt, you could serve a notice of defect based on that. But if they have the right to cure, then they have the same rights as the inspection contingency that within 10 days, they could decide to cure the defects. More often than not, people just do it because they have to anyway, regardless of who's buying the house. Line 76 through 78 are just talking about traditional sewer, like municipal sewer. Um, and it just explains how that would work if there's any kind of assessment in place, like if someone lives in the city of Milwaukee and they've received an assessment that they're going to be changing out some of the sewer lines. Most common in our area is going to be the lead. Like for the water, the lead line being changed. If there's an assessment for that, that the seller is aware of prior, then the seller would need to pay it. But if there's one kind of in limbo and the seller hasn't been notified of that, it would be prudent for the buyer to contact the official of the area. Again, more specifically, this happens in Milwaukee County to see if there would be any pending or upcoming options for changing out that lead lateral moving like toward the house. So this is one that changed a few years back, line 79 through 90, talks about financing. So the important one to note, because some agents do ask for this, is lines 81 through 83 or letter A. So it says within 7 days of acceptance, the buyer shall obtain written confirmation from a financial institution that they've applied for financing. So if it's not necessarily they have to do it right off the bat, but the seller may request it. So if the seller delivers a written request for the confirmation of application, then the buyer has to deliver that no later than 5 days after the seller just asks for it. So the seller only has 7 days to ask for this. And let's say they ask on day 3, then from day 3, the buyer has 5 days to get confirmation from their lender that they did apply for financing. It's not super common that a seller asks for this, but sometimes agents will ask for this. So it's just important to know that it's in here and it is relevant, and can be enforced. Because it also says if you don't get it to the seller within that 5 days, the seller at their option may declare the offer null and void. So it is important to get that to them if it's requested. Again, just kind of some cover yourself language that the buyer agrees to pay any costs obtaining financing, any flood insurances required, anything like that. That they understand what a loan commitment is and that that's coming from their financial institution, and that they are in charge of bringing the money to closing that they've agreed upon. Lines 91 through 96 regard the waiver of financing commitment. So if you are not doing a financing contingency because it's a cash offer, then it's stating that within 7 days, if left blank, so more often than not, it'll be 7 days of delivery, the buyer would give written verification from a financial institution that they have the funds. So this would be a proof of funds. Again, in our current climate, we're usually providing a proof of funds with the offer to get accepted. So this is usually like a moot line. But if for some reason they accepted the offer without seeing that, you would need to provide a proof of funds within 7 days unless you change the date in line 91 of acceptance. Does anybody have questions on any of this before I keep going? Okay. So different loan types are also outlined in this form. So lines 97 through 99, it's more so it's going to be for VA loans that this matters. But this allows them to terminate the offer if the property fails to appraise for the purchase price. So sometimes they do have like tax service fees, and that usually is on the seller when it's a government loan like an FHA, VA, or USDA loan. It's not a lot. It's not more than $100, but this is just basically outlining that, and then the seller signs off on that when they initial the bottom of this document. For VA loans, you would check line 100, which would then go through 107. It's talking about a VA mortgage, that there's a funding fee that it is included with a VA mortgage, and you would want to put in whatever that percentage is here. It falls to 0 if it's left blank. The funding fee can't be paid like in half. So the seller can't pay half, buyer can't pay half. The buyer would agree to pay all other things with financing, but a lot of times what we used to see was that people were asking the seller to pay the funding fee. But when we've gotten into the more competitive market, especially with VA mortgages, this funding fee leaves, I mean, it takes more of the proceeds from the seller. So they're going to not want to pay this. So the buyer then would pay it. So you can go either way on it. You could have the buyer or seller pay it, but it has to be one or the other. It can't be like a negotiation that we split it. And if you have questions on what that funding fee looks like, again, that would be something you want to just talk to the lender about and ask what you should be putting in that line, just because it can vary. VA mortgages also require a termite inspection. So a termite inspection is usually done with the inspection. So you'd want to let the home inspector know that they are getting a VA loan and they would need a termite inspection. It used to not apply to Wisconsin because we really don't have an issue with termites here. But they since amended that it has to be every state just so that it's equal across the board. Depending upon the home inspector, sometimes they include it for free. Otherwise, it's usually like $100, $150 to kind of add that on. But you want to make sure that you have that done because they do require it for financing. Does anyone have questions on that?
I do not that, but I do have a question. Hi, Ashley.
Hi.
Hi, on 100, is there a percentage to not to exceed, or you just put 0 there?
That's what I would check with the lender about. So I would just say, what should we be putting in for this funding fee?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And you said to make it more competitive, then it should be buyer. You'd strike seller then on that one for line 100.
Correct. Yeah. So if you're in
Okay.
competition, I would definitely, if the buyer can swing it, because kind of the appeal of a VA mortgage and kind of the right of, being a veteran and getting this type of mortgage is that you don't really have to put anything down.
Right.
But this obviously funding fee would require some cash down. So a lot of times they would put it on the seller prior to when it was a more competitive market. Now we're
Okay.
kind of evening out a little bit, so you might have the opportunity to allow the seller to pay it again. So striking out buyer and reading seller to pay it. But if you're in competition, I would have the conversation with your buyer that, hey, we might want to take this on our own. It's not a ton of money
That's what I was gonna
in
say.
the
Just like
grand
a couple
scheme of
$100
things.
or
Yeah, I mean, I think, don't quote me, but I want to say it's
no.
maybe like $1,500 or something.
Okay, so
It
there's a
just kind of
decent amount.
depends on, again, it depends on a lot on the lender. They're all a little different. So
Okay. And if the buyer, if he did strike seller to make it competitive, then he would, to Yolanda's point, you'd probably put 100%. So you'd right, you'd say like buyer agrees to pay the entire funding fee,
no,
or do you
so what
just
that's saying is the funding fee is like what the percentage of the funding fee is.
oh of the actual
Yeah,
total
of the
payment and everything
mortgage
or
amount.
the
Yeah.
mortgage? Yeah, yeah, got it,
Yeah.
got it. Okay, okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Lines 108 through 114 is allowing that this property could be affected by existing and proposed conditions of the surrounding property. So like this is probably more applicable in like a new construction area, that, you know, there could be things coming in to the area. Their view from the back might change, stuff like that, so that they can't necessarily put that on anybody else saying like, well, we had no idea that a Quick Trip was being built behind our house or something along those lines. And that, I mean, if a lot of this is stuff that you would think you would not need to specify in writing, but again, it's nice that it's in here because it's just a protection to everybody that like, hey, the buyer's aware that if you're near an airport, a highway, a farm, that there may be a smell and there might be a noise, and that you are acknowledging that in writing in this form.
So Ashley, so that would be like on the last page where you write that in under the addendum area where you write that information in?
The area conditions.
Yeah,
Nope, that's crash printed in here. So it'll be the line 108 through 114. It's already crash printed in there.
okay,
Again, as just like cover yourself verbiage saying that, you know, they acknowledge that they've been able to review all of the documents regarding known and unknown conditions to the
okay,
area, and that they're kind of signing off that like,
okay.
yeah, we know we're by a farm.
Oh,
And there's going to be a smell. Not that they can come back and be like, well, you didn't tell me that the wind was going to change and I was going to smell this, you know? So
right, okay,
property conditions are also just, this is all, so basically page 2 after the VA information, all of page 3, these are all just like cover yourself verbiage. It's nothing they're signing. It's just like stuff they're signing off on when they ultimately initial at the bottom. So you don't need to add these, they're already added. So the property conditions are it just says that you are aware of like news media and other information sources that indicate that there could be things coming within the property. So like what I was saying is sometimes one of the big things we ran across was Milwaukee having these lead laterals going to houses from the street. So a lot of people were kind of like saying, well, we didn't know that, things like that. So it's just saying that you could be getting information from these, but from like public sources, but it's not to say that this specific property is in fact being affected by that. And unless it's disclosed in writing, the seller is giving their information to the best of their knowledge that it doesn't contain these things. So if they are saying like, we don't think it has asbestos, we don't think it has lead-based paint, they're giving to the best of their knowledge, especially if they've never had those items tested. Why would they think it would be there? So if there was past flooding, so this is kind of a good point to make, given that we had flooding a couple months back, it could result in mold growth, which might prevent health risks. So this is just saying if there's any information or evidence that there has been excessive moisture in the property, it's really on the buyer to decide if they want to consult with a mold expert and have that looked at, have it tested for unsafe levels of mold. It's just saying that they acknowledge that they do have the ability to do that and that it's on them to make that decision. This also covers real estate agents. So buyer further acknowledges that neither seller nor real estate agents involved have made representations concerning the property other than those stated in the offer. So that would be like the seller signed condition report, things of that nature. And us as agents, if we knew of a material adverse defect that the seller didn't disclose, we would need to fill out that material adverse defect form that for agents that we would need to include, which very rarely happens, but it does happen. Lines 131 through 137, if the seller has knowledge of an underground storage tank, they would need to make sure that it's properly abandoned. So they would need to have, they basically need to fill them and abandon them with the DNR. So more often than not, it's already done, but sometimes in older properties, they haven't had it done, or if someone's been there like 50 years and they just never thought it was a big deal, you can run across this. And this is saying that you want to make sure that it's handled appropriately. So if one's discovered prior to closing, they'd have to let the buyer know about it and any related components, and that it's either in full compliance with the state and local regulations, which it not always is. It's usually not, because it can contaminate the ground around it. So then you would do an abandonment. 138 through 150 just talks about zoning and building restrictions. So this is saying municipal zoning and building restrictions can affect the property. So you want to make sure that you are aware of all of the zoning type before, like when you're writing the offer and accepting the offer, because it can affect the buyer's ability to build, remodel, enlarge the property. We run across this a lot with lake properties because usually if there's a house built near a lake, it's been grandfathered in. So if they decide like, hey, we want to build this giant house here, it almost always has to either use part of the house, like the same foundation of the original build there, or has to only use that. So it just kind of depends on the lake and what the regulation is there. So sometimes people will build like up because they have to use just that part of the foundation. Otherwise, they'll build off of that house in order to build. But this is saying like you want to make sure that you can do what you want to do with the property before purchasing it, and that you understand what the zoning and the regulations for that zoning are, restrictions are for that, so that whatever they intend to do with the property can be done. Especially if they don't want to purchase it based on what they find there. It says buyer assumes all responsibility and liability to research, verify, and confirm this information. So you can find this information for them, but ultimately this is saying this is up to them to research and verify. So often, you would want to have them get in touch with somebody on that so that they get it straight from them versus you offering the information that could be incorrect. Information on promotional materials. This just basically covers MLS. So anything that's in MLS can not be verified. I'm sure you've seen people write this in the private remarks that they have not verified the square footage, the lot size, all of those things. This just further states that and saying that this is all possibilities. Like we've gotten it from a public source, but we have not gone in ourselves and verified that each room is X or that the entire square footage is X. So it's just, again, putting on them. If it's really important to them that the square footage is 20 or 2,201 versus 2,200, then that's on them to verify, not us. We're just giving them to the best of our knowledge from public data. Unless a current survey has been provided, so lines 157 through 158, to the buyer, so some people are really worried about different things. So if they're like, where's the lot line? I need to know where that is, or things like that, then they would want to see if we can get a survey for that. But if they don't get the survey, all of the lot line ideas and encroachments, let's say the neighbor's fence is just a little bit on what we think the lot line is, the buyers would want to then investigate it by obtaining a current survey to make sure. So if there's something that's super glaring, like there's very clearly the neighbor's fence on a large part of their yard, or if there's a driveway that kind of runs through the property that's not necessarily theirs, those are things that you would want to make sure that a title company is looking at and making sure that there is a recorded easement or encroachment on the property that's already been agreed upon by all of the people involved. So like if it's the neighbor that, has the driveway through, that there is already something in writing and recorded that states who's in charge of that and that they, are allowed to use that space and things along those lines. So that's really a good thing to discuss with a title company. Floodplains, wetlands, buyers aware that a floodplain and wetland is referred to in the offer. So we ask the seller if they know about it, but we don't necessarily, we can interpret it, but it might not be accurate. So they would be encouraged to examine the maps, or check with government officials to check on the accuracy. So like, for instance, if there's a wetland behind the property and, the seller's like, nope, it's not in a floodplain and it's not a big deal. If the buyer wanted to verify that is the fact, then they would want to do that on their own. That's up to them to decide if it's material to their decision to purchase. Um, So again, this talks about if they have any, for insurance provisions, if they have any issues with any of these things, getting insurance. So there are different types of material that can have issues getting insurance. I have not personally run across those. But if the buyer, if there is a interesting material like a synthetic stucco or wood composite, that has been previously associated with moisture and mold, and they wanted to check that out in terms of getting insurance and if that would significantly increase their insurance rate, then that's where this is kind of covering, like, you would need to verify that you are gonna talk to the appropriate people on whether or not this is going to be an issue with this type of material, or if the insurance is going to change there. Something that we more commonly run across are the electric service and flood insurance issues. So knob and tube wiring is in a lot of homes in the Milwaukee area, and they are very hard to insure, often cannot be insured. So the buyer and seller is aware that if that exists, that it may require a specific type of insurance, which I have yet to find someone who will do. Otherwise, they agree that it might need to be replaced with wiring consistent to current code. So it says the buyer and seller are aware. So that's already written in there. And then flood insurance is the other thing. So if the property is near water and it says they are unsure if it's in a floodplain, which is often what's written in MLS because they kind of defer any kind of liability to the person purchasing the house, you would definitely want to make sure. The easiest way to check with that is you can check with the buyer's lender, and they should be able to see if the property falls within a floodplain, or not, because they do a flood map, and they might be able to give you that information ahead of time, because flood insurance can significantly increase the insurance value. And depending upon how much it is in the floodplain, it can also make it very difficult to even obtain. Okay, so rental properties. The city of Milwaukee requires a registration form for residential properties, and that needs to be done within 15 days of conveyance. So it's just letting the buyer know that after closing, they are responsible to file this with the city of Milwaukee or the city of West Dallas. They both have requirements here. Here's where that lead water service ordinance is coming in. So it requires that the property owner pay for the replacement of privately owned portions of the water service. So when they usually ask that it be done when they're doing the city part of the lateral, and that's where that assessment then sometimes comes in. And sometimes, basically, they should go online. They can go online and check to see whether or not it's affected and when it's scheduled to be taking place. If if it's material to their decision to purchase the house, then they would need to contact local officials, make sure that they fully understand what would be involved there. I had one that was in Whitefish Bay, that the seller did not know it was a lead lateral. We had some other issues with the water line, so within the house, which ended up being lead as well. And then they found that, and then they went to the street, and it ended up being lead. So the seller ended up having to replace all of that lead line. because it came within the house, basically. So most of the time it ends at the house. City letters. This is basically what the title company is going to pull for you. So no later than closing, the seller will provide written verification of property taxes and or special assessments or balances due. This is what the title company is going to automatically pull for you. They call them specials letters. They're going to make sure that that's either paid, or if it's not paid, they're going to have it paid on the closing statement. So everything's paid up and there are no liens that can be placed against the property as far as these items are concerned. If there's any provisions that are conflicting in any of other documents you have attached, the addendum A will prevail. So anything that's noted here would supersede the other conflicting note. Let's see. I've never actually read this addendum provisions line. Okay, so it's just saying that addendum A might not work in all transactions. You might not need any of this information. And if you have questions on it, then you should talk to legal counsel about any of the provisions. Here's where you can add other items. So rather than, if you can just put in attachments on the offer to purchase, so you could just put GMAR addendum A, and then this is where you could add the other items. So like a lead-based paint addendum, addendum O for occupancy, addendum R for rental property. If there's an addendum AC, you could type that in here. So you could put escalation or whatever, and then label AC here. So you can make sure you check it and then label it. So lead-based paint would be label S. Occupancy O, rental property R. This is probably my very favorite part of the addendum A. Lines 206 through 215 allow you to write another contingency in the offer. So if you have kind of an interesting situation where you want the seller to do something on or before a specific date and you'd like a repercussion in there if they don't follow through with that, this is a great place to put it because it's written like every other contingency in the offer. So let's say it would say this offer is contingent upon, let's say, seller filling all the holes in the walls on or before, let's say, October 31st. In the event the holes are not filled, you know, whatever. This is obviously not a great example, but in the event that X is not done, the buyer at buyer's option can terminate this offer by written notice delivered to the seller within 3 days. If the buyer does not send that notice, then this contingency waives itself. So this is just allowing you to put in another contingency, and it's very explicit as to what needs to be done and that it needs to be done on or before a specific date. And then the repercussion, if whatever is not done, then it's very clearly written what's going to happen, that the buyer has the option to terminate. And if they do not send that notice, then it automatically waives itself. Additional provisions here, you can, just like the offer to purchase, you can write in other things. More often than not, you've usually put them in the offer to purchase or this additional contingency line, but it is blank in there for you to use if needed. And then lines 231 through 241 are information that the title company is going to ask for anyway. So it's easier just to fill it out here. Otherwise, they're just going to email you at some point and ask you for all of this information. I usually just have MLS open when I'm writing it. So I'll have MLS up and I'll just copy and paste all of the other agents' information here when I'm in zip forms. And then it's just the initials. Everybody agrees to everything that's written in here. Does anybody have questions?
You said you will have the MLS open for what under the additional provisions?
So usually I'll have it open when I do this lines 234 to 241, because then I'll just like, if I'm the buyer's agent, my stuff's
Oh.
like kind of already in there,
Okay.
but it's really annoying to try and find the seller's agent's address and all that stuff.
Okay.
So if you
Gotcha.
have MLS open, then you can copy and paste it from the bottom of the
Okay.
MLS sheet.
Got you. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else regarding this or anything that I kind of touched on that didn't make sense?
No, thank you.
Okay, great.
But actually,
Appreciate your time. Oop.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Yolanda.
I just want to have one question. So I'm newly coming on, so I can go back and watch pre-recorded Zoom recordings, like for the contract. Like I said, you had did like one on contracts, and then this is
Yeah.
addendum to the contract.
Yes.
Okay.
So they should have them on the Keller Williams YouTube channel.
Okay.
And if not, the WRA also offers a line by line training. So if
Okay.
you log into your WRA account and you go to my classes, you should
Okay.
be able to add that as a class, and it's free for WRA members.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, I can let you guys go.